Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to be back. It's good to see that what it says up there is what I'm going to be doing as well. It's always encouraging to know that I've prepared the right thing. I'm going to start with a question. What cooking smell lingers the longest?
Curries.
Curries? Anything else? Fish? Cabbage.
No.
Well, I thought of fish, so hold that thought as we think about Jonah in the belly of a fish. Because if you know what stale cooking of fish smells like, you can imagine, can't you, what it must have been like for Jonah in the belly of a fish. It's probably best not to imagine it for too long. Now, Jonah was a prophet, but without giving any disrespect, I would say he probably wasn't the sharpest tool in the box as far as prophets go, and I'll explain why. Because as a prophet, living when he did, he would have been very familiar with the Psalms, in particular the psalm that we've just heard sung about, Psalm 139, which says, "Where can I go to escape your spirit? Where can I go from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you're there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you're there." So he would have been very familiar with the words of the Psalms, yet as the account in the first chapter of the book of Jonah shows, in his haste to ignore God's calling, he forgot that you can't escape from God's presence. So like I say, perhaps not the sharpest tool in the box as far as prophets are concerned, but anyway, we're going to start by reading the account of Jonah, which you're probably very familiar with. It's one of those stories that are often used for children because it's quite an exciting story, isn't it? Anyway, here we go. This is the first part of the story of Jonah. And in the Bible it's headed, "Jonah runs from the Lord." The Lord gave this message to Jonah, son of Amittai: "Get up and go to the great city of Nineveh. Announce my judgment against it, because I have seen how wicked its people are." But Jonah got up and went in the opposite direction to get away from the Lord. He went down to the port of Joppa, where he found a ship leaving for Tarshish. He bought a ticket, went on board, hoping to escape from the Lord by sailing to Tarshish. But the Lord hurled a powerful wind over the sea, causing a violent storm that threatened to break the ship apart. Fearing for their lives, the desperate sailors shouted to their gods for help and threw the cargo overboard to lighten the load. But all this time, Jonah was sound asleep down in the hold. So the captain went down after him and said, "How can you sleep at a time like this? Get up and pray to your God. Maybe he will pay attention to us and spare our lives." Then the crew cast lots to see which of them had offended the gods and caused this terrible storm. When they did this, the lots identified Jonah as the culprit. "Why has this awful storm come down on us?" they demanded. "Who are you? What's your line of work? What country are you from? What's your nationality?" Sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? Jonah answered, "I'm a Hebrew and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the land." Well, the sailors were terrified when they heard this. They had already told them that he was running away from the Lord. "Oh, why did you do it?" they groaned. And since the storm was getting worse all the time, they asked him, "What should we do to stop this storm?" "Throw me into the sea," Jonah said, "and it will become calm again. I know that this terrible storm is all my fault." Instead, the sailors rowed even harder to get the ship to the land. But the stormy sea was so violent, they couldn't make it. Then they cried out to the Lord, Jonah's God, "O Lord," they pleaded, "don't make us die for this man's sin, and don't hold us responsible for his death. O Lord, you have sent this storm upon him for your own good reasons." Then the sailors picked Jonah up, threw him into the raging sea, and the storm stopped at once. The sailors were awestruck by the Lord's great power, and they offered him a sacrifice and vowed to serve him. Now the Lord had arranged for a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was inside the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. And now you can imagine the smell in the fish that Jonah had to put up with. That bit wasn't in the Bible, by the way. So, the Great Escape. We've all heard about great escapes. Let's put things into perspective. Sailing from Joppa, which is modern-day Jaffa in Israel, to Tarshish, which is widely believed to be in southern Spain, would have taken about 2 to 3 months back in the day. This journey covers roughly 2 to 2,500 miles across the entire length of the Mediterranean Sea. So, Jonah wasn't just prepared to run in the opposite direction just down the road. He was going to go for a big, big journey. But a few thoughts on this first chapter. God clearly had a message for Jonah, but Jonah chickened out. We're not quite sure why he wasn't willing to obey God, and he did his level best to get as far away from Nineveh as possible. So here's a question for you to ponder. Have you ever heard God's prompting to do something, but for whatever reason, you shied away from it? There's a question. I don't know whether anybody wants to share anything that's happened to them in that line. If not, that doesn't matter, but it's certainly worth pondering. But in spite of Jonah's disobedience, one very positive thing has come out of the fact that the sailors were in fear, and that the fact that they turned to God and vowed to serve and worship him. That was a positive. And it shows that nobody is immune from the love of God, however distant they may seem from him. Sometimes, as was the case with the sailors, something quite drastic has to happen before people recognise their need for God. God's mercy extends to everyone. And interestingly, God uses those who we sometimes least expect to drive his message home. I want to just pause there and take the opportunity to talk about a personal experience of running away from God, because it's something I did, and I don't think I've shared this before at CCM, but I suppose it's a personal story, and it's also a personal testimony. When I was very young, I was 4 years old, my mother died. Something that I witnessed. This was back in the 1950s, and in the 1950s there was no such thing as grief counselling for children. It probably wasn't for adults as well, for that matter. You just had to get on with it, and in a sense that's what I had to do. But not only had my mum died, my dad then had to go to South Africa on business for 6 months, and he went probably about 3 months. My mum died in December. I think he went to South Africa in February, and my sister and I went to live with an aunt in Lincolnshire, and Dad was away for 6 months. So not only has Mum died, there's also that period of separation, I suppose. When Dad returned to the UK, he remarried, and so I got a new mum and a stepbrother, that's right, stepbrother. So life went on. We went to church, went to Sunday school, went to church every week as I recall, so I had a very good grounding in the scriptures. But as I got older, particularly in my teens, I turned away from God. Didn't seem to have much relevance in my life. And then when I moved away from home to go to college, it seemed to me a great opportunity to just leave it all behind. I remember when we got married, Pam and I got married halfway through my college course. I was a kept man for a couple of years. And I remember we'd moved to Coventry, we'd moved to just down the road really in Longford, and hadn't been there for long in our flat, and a knock came at the door, and it was somebody from the local Methodist church, because I went to Methodist church as a youngster. And I don't know, the Methodist church had become a member, and I had become a member. He came along, obviously word had got we'd moved to Coventry, so he came knocking on the door to chase me up really to go to his local church. And I turned the opportunity down. I just didn't think it was for me anymore. Thank you very much. Off we went, closed the door, and that was it. And carried on with my life. Happily married. Had 2 children. And I don't know why. I suppose it's because it was a done thing. We thought we ought to get the boys christened. So we did. First one, and then the other. David, our youngest one, was christened at St Thomas's Church in Kersey, near where we live. And Pam started going, didn't you, to the church, and met a lady there who spoke to Pam, and Pam came to faith. I didn't, but she did. And this was in my early 30s, I think. And as time went on, it was clear I was struggling with a number of sort of emotional things, which all went back to that time of bereavement and separation and feelings of insecurity and feelings of not being worthy, I suppose. And things came to a head, and I was really struggling. Pam, bless her, spoke to me, prayed for me, and I came to the realisation that I couldn't run away from God. And as we heard in Psalm 139, God always has his hand on us, even in our mother's womb. And in the same way that he had his hand on Jonah, even though Jonah didn't recognise it in the beginning, he had his hand on me as well. And as I say, I came to faith. Even though it was a struggle, and that wasn't the end of the story, as it were. But it just shows that, God is there all the time, even though we sometimes deny it and don't even want to acknowledge it. So, Jonah ran away from God. I ran away from God. But God didn't run away from me. Amen.
Amen.